You're in the right place. This is the Eatfluencer Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Maggie Landes. Together, we are going to unpack everything about eating and discover the what, when, and how that will let you lead your best life. This is not your doctor's conversation about nutrition. Today is when you can start to love eating again. Let food be food and you be you. Get ready to get eatfluenced. Hello and welcome back to the Eatfluencer Podcast. I'm your host, Maggie Landes, and today is a awesome guest episode. You are going to want to listen all the way to the end. As you know, if you're a regular listener, I do about maybe 1 out of every 3 or 4 episodes with a guest conversation. I don't even like to say interview because honestly, it's a conversation. You feel like you are sitting in their living room, sitting at their kitchen table, talking about their perspective in this non-diet space. And I've got a good one today. This is Steph Gaudreau. She is a certified intuitive eating counselor and nutritional therapy practitioner. And I have to say that she has her own podcast, which I have listened to for a very long time, long before I had this podcast. And she is one of those total motivators that if you're even entertaining the idea of entering this non-diet space, either personally or professionally, she is like the spark that lights the fire. But her work now is with women particularly, and she helps them break up with diet culture so they can feel free to eat. She has a best-selling book called The Core 4, and in that book she details a 4-pillar approach to building health, embracing your body, and owning your power. She is trained in biology and human physiology, yay, nerd like me, and is also a nutritional therapy practitioner, certified intuitive eating counselor, and a USA weightlifting sports performance coach. So she's done all the things. And as I mentioned before, her weekly podcast is called the Listen to Your Body podcast, and she has now over 3 million downloads of that podcast. She's been featured as an international speaker in Self, ESPN Radio, Outside, Mind, Body, Green, all the big stages. So I'm just, honored, honestly, and very humbled that she made the time to have this conversation with me and with you. So without any further ado, let's get into this conversation. Today, we're talking about where is the entry point? Where do you start? We really address the ideas that, gathering information, learning about the non-diet approach and intuitive eating is great. And it's a first step, but ultimately you have to, get out of that analysis paralysis and jump in, deal with the issues, including the food, the emotions, your environment, all those sorts of things. And that's what Steph is an expert in making clear, is how to make ideas turn into change. So let's get to our conversation now. Well, welcome back to the Eatfluencer Podcast. And as promised, I have a wonderful guest today, Steph Gaudreau. And you heard her introduction, but she has got so much to contribute to this conversation. I'm glad you are here to join me today, Steph. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I always love being on other podcasts. As a podcaster, it's a nice break from the other side of the mic.
Right. You get to just talk and somebody else does all the editing, and it's easy, right? Well, yeah. We have so much to potentially talk about, but one thing I thought was really practical for our conversation today was kind of, you've talked about it on your podcast, this idea that we as everybody, overwhelmed with hearing about food and eating all the time from every direction. Mm-hmm. And when people are interested in leaving diet culture, this is sometimes a new idea, and it's like yet another bunch of information piled on. So when we all know that we're operating on like the very last bit of our emotional bandwidth, how do you recommend, when you work with your clients or when you are talking to your audience, where's the good starting point? Where's the entry point for all this?
Yeah, it's kind of the $1,000,000 question that I get asked all the time. Like, what do I do first? What's the thing that I tackle? And the interesting thing with things like intuitive eating and finding a more gentle way of approaching your nutrition is that there are so many entry points. It's like, imagine a California freeway. I mean, I live in California. So California freeway, right? There's like on ramps coming from all over the place. And so I think just kind of keeping in mind that there's no one quote unquote right way is helpful. However, yes, like you said, people at the end of the day, they might be learning more about gentle nutrition, or they might be learning more about their own food beliefs and how being really rigid has not helped their relationship with food. And so at the end of the day, there's these kind of layers of an onion, right? We have at the kind of the outer layers is like our beliefs, our relationship with food. But when it comes down to making change, we still have to interact with food on a practical level. So you are either going to the grocery store, buying the food, preparing the food, cooking the food, right? Whatever.
Mhm.
Or you're, even when I sit on Instacart sometimes and I'm making decisions about what am I going to put in the cart? What am I going to make for meals? Or you are going to go out and buy a meal somewhere and bring it home and eat it. Like very few people have a personal chef that just does all that for them, right?
Well, that would solve a lot of
So
problems, wouldn't it?
it would be super nice. But for the most part, there is some amount of planning, gathering, cooking of the food that people have to do on a day-to-day basis. Right. And so we can't escape that. And so what I try to get people to remember is like, think about making change. Okay. Here's my formula for making change. It's very simple. It's three things in this equation. The first thing is awareness. You have to be aware of what you're doing if you want to make a change.
Right. Or there's no directionality to it if you don't know where you start from. Yeah.
Exactly. Like if you're not aware of what you're currently doing, and I'll give you a quick example. A client of mine, and I was just sharing this with you off air. A client of mine is somebody who's working on, her blood sugar, needs a little bit of help in terms of blood sugar management. And I had her just sort of like write down, like, what is she eating? And not in a, like, we're not logging this in an app kind of way, but just a general awareness tool of like, what are you eating and how did you feel? And after one day, she realized there was a connection between skipping breakfast and how she felt in terms of her mental clarity, right? Like mentally foggy, everything we would associate with like
Right.
low blood sugar, basically. And so that was a huge awareness piece.
In one day, she figured that out. One day was
in
all
one
it took to
day.
be aware. Yeah.
Right. So awareness is the first step, or the first ingredient, I would say. The second ingredient is willingness.
Okay.
What are you willing to change? And this is important because this is where we get buy-in, autonomy. This is where we look at your preferences, your lived experience. And here's the thing, when making changes about, say, your health and nutrition, quite frequently people are used to just being told what they have to do, what they're supposed to do, what they should do, what they should eat,
Right.
when they should
Yeah.
eat. And oftentimes that creates defensiveness. There's no willingness. If I told you, hey, you should eat kale at every meal, and you're like, I've tried kale every way, I hate the taste of it, right? You're not going to be willing to do that thing. So it
Mhm.
doesn't really matter, right? So willingness is a second piece. The third piece is aligned action. Aligned action. So we
Well, I
need
like that. I like alignment.
Yeah. So we need some kind of alignment. Like what are your values? What's your why? Like, why do you care about this? Why are you looking at your health and well-being, for example? Like, what is your bigger overarching why? What are the small, like tiny habits? And I would say, at any given time, I try to get people to focus on no more than one or two things. What are the one or two things that you're going to do that's going to move you closer to that change, right? Because those repeatable small habits are what's going to move us forward. And so I think that, kind of going back to this equation, right? Awareness, willingness, and aligned action. When I'm working with people on the awareness piece, I think the biggest bang for your buck in terms of where do you start is in some kind, if we're talking about nutrition or food or what are your habits, is mindful eating.
Mm-hmm.
Becoming more mindful, because here's the thing, people think because they come from a diet background or they've got experience with all the cleanses and detoxes and right. They're used to like, okay, I need to like disrupt my whole life and like up everything is a giant upheaval. And
Right.
I'm doing things that are really, really difficult. I'm changing a million things at one time. We know that's not sustainable. And I really love mindful eating as a kind of an entry point because it doesn't usually require a big outlet of time,
Mm-hmm.
which is in short supply, right? These days, more than ever. So it doesn't require you to like do something for a half an hour before you eat, right? It doesn't generally require that you're making a lot of giant changes. You're just becoming more mindful, more aware, more present. And
Right.
that in and of itself gives the awareness piece
Awareness. Yeah.
that drives the rest of the equation forward. For me, like when I'm talking with people and they're like, where do I start? Where do I start? I'm like, well, I mean, I can give you my opinion is to become more mindfully aware.
Right.
When you're
And that
sitting
has to come first before you can establish sort of the ownership
down.
about your change, right? I kind of look at it like it
Hmm.
it doesn't, like when you say, awareness is the first ingredient, like it really is literally the first ingredient, because you
Sure.
can't, if you have no point of reference,
Hmm.
then there's no change. That's not really on a solid footing.
Totally.
So yeah. So mindful eating, what are some ways, and I know what you mean by that, but for somebody who doesn't,
Yeah.
kind of, they hear all these words and mindful, intuitive, blah, blah, blah. What's
Yeah.
mindful eating? How would you describe it to somebody?
Sure. So mindful eating really comes from the concept of mindfulness, right, which comes from Eastern religious and philosophical tradition. So just want to, note that we've like borrowed these concepts and applied them to food, but the idea is to be more present and aware with what you're doing in a non-judgmental way. And so the problem in diet culture, as you know, and you've talked about quite extensively, is like the judgment that we then heap on ourselves for doing the things that we presume or we have been told are bad or unhealthy or we shouldn't do, right? So we carry all this like guilt and shame and it becomes this
Yes.
self-perpetuation. So what I kind of split these up into a few categories. Like the first is kind of the mental emotional connection. So is sitting, like for example, if you're sitting down to a meal, can you just um, take a few moments and just get into a gratitude mindset of like, what am I grateful for right now? I mean, I could be grateful for if somebody prepared the meal for me. I mean, what a
Hmm.
gift. What an absolute gift that person has given me of a nourishment on a plate. Or maybe I'm going to think about gratitude for being able to, even have this food. Or I'm thinking about gratitude for all the people involved in the growing, the
Yeah.
harvesting, the transportation of this food, right? So gratitude can be a huge piece for people. Um, Simply getting present with your body. So this is kind of like the physical, right? Like taking a few breaths. And we know that slowing down during mealtime is so important for things like digestion as well. Rushing through meals can be something that people develop from other phases of life. So
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of people in my community who are like ex-military people, and they were like, yeah, I had like 5 minutes to eat, and so I just brought that into
Yeah.
the rest of my life. Or I grew up in a family with 4 kids, right? So there were 6 of us at mealtime, and like there was always a little bit of like, we want to make sure you get enough
Yeah.
kind of
Right.
thing. Or even food scarcity, right? If you have food scarcity in your history, or in your present, like that can contribute. So physically thinking about things like stopping and taking a few breaths, chewing a little bit. Can we chew a little bit more? Um, I always think about, I'm the slowest eater at the table, so I have no problem like chewing my food extensively. But for people that aren't used to chewing, is like just being aware of like, how many bites do you take? Can you stretch that out a tiny bit more? Putting your fork down every few bites to just slow yourself down a little bit. Noticing either before or during your meal what the quality of the hunger that you sense might be in your body. Where are you noticing those hunger signals? Are they pleasant? Are they unpleasant? What is that like? How does it change throughout the meal? So maybe you do before, during, and after. And you're literally just like stopping and noticing what you sense.
Hmm.
Um, And then the environment is kind of the third piece of that I think about. So I notice that when my eating area is very cluttered, because our dining room table is like a multi-purpose surface for us in art. We live in a very small house.
Uh-huh.
And so if I have like, I'm kind of like wedged in amongst all these books and piles of papers and my laptop, and that sort of like environment in which you
Yeah.
eat can really affect how you feel as well. So, right, kind of mental, emotional, gratitude stuff, physical sensations and what's going on in your body. And then like thirdly, the environment around you.
Right. And it's like all about being present. And I think we don't do a good job of that I'm speaking generally. I'm speaking for myself, I guess, is this is like eating is something I do several times a day. And I've just got a lot of other things to do. I don't like really make a white space for like my meal, like for the eating, we do for the food prep and the cooking and the shopping, but we're not as good, at least I'm not as good with the actual eating. So that's really, that's good. I like all those tips. I always like to have my listeners have like, sort of actionable items and all that stuff is like, we're not talking in some sort of weirdo, rigid, like uber structured way. Cause that takes away the experience of it. We're talking about just kind of just calming down. Really. A lot of this is,
just noticing.
Noticing, being present. So
the last part, just to note really quickly on that, because I know a lot of people talk about like eat completely undistracted, put down your phone, put your laptop away, no reading books, no da da da.
Yeah.
Look, like the idea that we're going to eat completely undistracted for every meal of our entire lives is not going to happen. I try to be really realistic too. So if people are working on the just like no distraction piece, I'm like, can you start with 2 minutes at the beginning of your meal or 5 minutes? Can you just like set a timer and just go, okay, right now I'm just going to be with this plate and the food and myself or my dining companions, and just be like without all of the stimulation and all the distraction. Because quite frequently people will say like, eat every meal undistracted. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not even going to do that. So I think it's worth
realistic. It's just not.
Yeah. It's worth thinking about like, where can I meet myself, where I'm at, and stretch myself a little bit without making the expectation, like you said, so high that, I didn't do the whole meal, so I messed it up, right? That just plays back into all or nothing thinking.
Yes. And I want to talk about that because that is such a huge, if you are a chronic dieter, you're all familiar with the like all in or all out, because that's what we've been doing. Like you do these major, like you said, huge, complete renovation of our eating personality, our eating behavior. It's rigid. It doesn't stick. It's not sustainable. We hate it. And then we just like quit. And then we feel terrible. So how do people shake that all or nothing? Like, how do we live with like imperfection? Like we're humans and we just still don't accept the idea that like we can make change without doing it perfectly. Because I bet you hear from your clients a lot, this like, I don't know how, like, especially when they're starting to learn about intuitive eating, mindful eating, they're like, they don't think they're doing it, quote, right. And the idea, and you said this at the very beginning, that there's no like right really. So how do people find that sweet spot of like, we do want to make change. We do want to improve our health. We do want to have a better relationship with food, but knowing that it's not like a light switch and you listen to a podcast, read a book, and then tomorrow it's like, whoosh, I'm a new human. How do you sit with that? How do you encourage people through that piece? Because I hear that so much, is that, they're afraid they're not doing it right.
Well, yeah. And it's no wonder when you come from diet culture and a diet mentality, right? That's all around you, that says things like, if you mess up, you go back to day one. Kindly,
isn't that terrible?
Kindly like F that, like we're humans. We're not going to be perfect. And so that perfection myth only feeds into this cycle. So there's a couple things. The first I would say is it's really essential to sit down and take an inventory of like, if you're a lifelong dieter, maybe it's like the most kind of like significant diet experiences that you've had, because quite often we come out of it with these rose-colored glasses that are then this narrative is reinforced by the dieting industry, right? As it's like solution, you're like, oh my gosh, this is the solution to my problem. And the diet industry is so smart. They are so smart at marketing. They know how to push your buttons emotionally and how to get you to go like, well, this is going to work again. It was my fault. I failed. Right.
Right.
So
Oh yeah.
this is the answer to my problem. And so I think sitting down and reflecting on those key experiences that you've had, if you think that there are some benefits, because I like to encourage people like, hey, maybe you realized that you really love, I don't know, roasting all your vegetables, and you learned that through this particular experience, or you realize that you don't drink enough water. And so this, I don't know, detox that you were on, you were like, hey, hydration's important to me. I
Right.
think it's important to note those positives. However, is being very honest about what it has cost you.
Uh-huh.
So has it cost you time, money, resources, relationships, peace? I mean, like peace of mind. What have these
Uh-huh.
experiences cost you? So that way, when you get tempted to be very all or nothing and you're thinking, you go back to those personal experiences. Because look, anyone listening to this can listen to me or you, and we're going to be like, diet culture sucks. But until you make it personal for you and you go, right, that time when I was doing Weight Watchers when I was 20, which is
Right.
me, and like this is like what it cost me. I was like weighing myself every day, and it
Yeah.
cost me like my self-esteem and my self-confidence. And until you make it real, it doesn't quite sit. It's very tempting to go back to the all or nothing. Like, I'm all in, I'm going to be perfect. So that would be one thing. The second thing is to be, I call these sort of like um flashing neon words
Mm-hmm.
in your own vocabulary, because right, our thoughts, when we treat them as true, become our beliefs, right? And then our beliefs impact our thoughts, and beliefs impact our feelings, and our feelings
Yeah.
impact our actions. Um, Look for these flashing neon sign words that indicate to you, they are like a flag that is, I am participating in some kind of all or nothing thinking here.
Right. Let me
The
see if I can guess
binary.
them, because I have this in my head. I
Okay.
think I see the flashing neon. So something about the I shouldn't, I can't, I'm not allowed, I have to, like words like that's what you're getting at.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So this language, right? We know that language is very powerful. Not only is it how we communicate to each other, but it's also forms like our inner narrative, our inner world. And it's very common when we've all grown up in a diet culture, to have internalized these ways of thinking and speaking about food and our bodies that are very binary, right? We know binary is two opposite sides of this sort of the same coin, right? So I'm either good or bad. I should or I shouldn't, right? This is healthy or unhealthy. This food is clean or it's
I don't know what the opposite of
sinful.
clean. Yeah.
Sinful. I say
Yeah.
sinful,
Yeah.
usually, we don't usually say things are dirty, but like it's a cheat. It's sinful. It's,
Yeah.
I should feel guilty about it. And so looking for that, because that is a huge sign that we are participating in what's, is basically like a cognitive, distortion is what it's called in psychology, right? So a cognitive distortion is, this like really overblown, exaggerated line of thinking when it comes to food. Because if we're in a cognitive distortion, we've noticed this flashing neon sign word, it's a chance for us to stop and go, let me question this. And I do this with my folks when we talk about the food police, right? Is like pushing back against the food police, because the food police love to like, they're all the voices that you've internalized about food being good or bad or healthy or unhealthy, or what you should and shouldn't do, when you should and shouldn't eat. And so
Right.
they like to needle you and like come at you. I like to think about, you're sitting in this interrogation room, and I'm like, your weapon against the food police is to fight back with questions and to interrogate the food police back, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
says who? Are these my only two options here? What else is possible in this scenario? Is this really true? Even where did I learn this? And so is to start shooting back with questions, that you ask yourself and say, like, is this really the case? And what has been my own personal experience with this? So I'll give you an example. Carbs are evil.
That's like the first amendment in the Food Police Bill of Rights.
Totally. Right. So evil, right? That's a huge flashing word, right?
Right.
And
Evil,
that like,
that's a personification of food, which food is just
yes,
a thing. It's not a person. So
exactly. Right. Yeah. So we have this like, yeah, this sort of like, and you kind of think, okay, let me like, this feels like a really extreme statement, right? Like food is evil. So I'd stop and say, like, is that true? And you could say, hey, like this is just like food has no personification. Food has no morality, right? Food is morally neutral. And then I might ask myself, for carbs, like, what is my own experience with carbohydrates? And I might go, you know what? If I do have some blood sugar issues, I notice that when I include more fiber rich carbs on my plate, I don't get as jittery. I don't get as, like
moody or whatever.
moody. Like I don't get as hangry. I don't get as sleepy afterwards. And so I can say, oh, you know what? For me, carbs aren't evil, but I noticed that for my blood sugar, when I include more fiber, because it slows down digestion, I feel a lot better. So you're able to take yourself out of the sort of like cognitive distortion, like the exaggeration, and make it practical for you because you've tied it back into your own personal experience.
Right.
And I think that that's a really powerful way to sort of take yourself out of the all or nothing, is by doing some of the things that I listed. I mean, I know that's a lot of stuff, but it's also like, where do you kind of walk yourself through it on these different levels?
Yeah, because it's the place we get stuck is, of course, we talked about this sort of information overload, but we get stuck subscribing to these rule sets or whatever you want to call them that are not even ours. And see, the beauty of the human body, and I'm a physician, so I come from this clinical thing. I mean, I just think the human body is like the coolest thing. And it works in real time, like minute to minute, person by person. So when you really stop and think, it doesn't even make sense that anybody would be advertising a singular way to eat and saying that it works for all people, because it honestly doesn't even make sense when you sort of step back a little bit and look at that, how ridiculous that sounds. So, but I do like the idea that, not to completely discredit, because that's another thing, is there's a lot of kind of guilt when we have dieted for decades and decades. We're like, to sort of discredit anything that we might have possibly learned about food or about our body is kind of unfair also, and so when you say just sort of pick out of your own experience, I think that really makes it like, okay, that's something we can do. I mean, people could even do that with pen and paper if they want to, like, make a list. This is what I did when I was 17 years old, and this is how I felt, and this is what I learned and what I had to give up and sacrifice, to do it. So
yeah.
Oh my word, Steph, we could talk forever about this.
Yes, we totally could.
Totally could. I am going to have you back again, because this conversation is great. And I want more and more people to feel empowered to kind of take back, the belief and really know that they can make these choices. And it's not as hard as it seems or sounds, and it's just, it's sometimes challenging where you and I are on the other side of the fence or whatever to, we can like cheerlead these people on, but when they're sitting there with this pile of information, to know just where to start, you just have to, tell somebody where to start. But I like all the tips you've shared. Those are all things that people could do literally starting today with nothing more than a pen and paper and a couple of minutes of their time. So I appreciate that. Do you have any last thoughts about this? And then I want everybody to know where they can find you and the other things that you're active in and where they can hear more from you, because 30 minutes does not do you justice. For sure.
Yes, my brain is full of random stuff. I would say probably the biggest thing is to embrace the idea of an additive approach to your food. And I know that like you're going to go, oh, adding, like my brain is, I already have a lot of things like adding more stuff, but right. Restriction and diet culture go hand in hand. So it's all about cutting out, restricting, doing, taking this away, staying away from this thing. And I'm always trying to get people to flip that narrative and go, what would you like to add? What would you like to experiment with? What sounds good to you? What foods do you like?
Yeah.
And people
that
are
transitions
like,
to like a place of curiosity and like personal investigation rather than judgment and like this whole having to withhold our desires and, really restrict. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I'm always thinking about, I'm kind of exploring. I wish there was like a female version of Indiana Jones. I don't know, maybe Lara Croft, Tomb Raider. I don't really know those movies very well, but I like to think like I'm putting on kind of my investigator hat and I'm like going out into the world and I'm exploring and I'm seeing what's there. And I want you to think about your food landscape like that too. It's all about discovery. It's about experimentation. Very few things that you're going to do are like permanent and forever. So it's like, what can you just open yourself up to trying, exploring with, adding some things in here or there. And that changes the energy around it so much. It's very, very different.
Oh yeah. I even tell people, I say, go to the produce section and on your next shopping trip and buy one thing that you've not prepared at home or you don't know, or you've never seen for that matter. And it doesn't, what is it like? Maybe $2 or $3 of your money. And you learn something and it may be a fail. You may decide you don't like bok choy that much or whatever, but how are you going to know if the only thing you allow yourself to eat is green beans and broccoli? Like you won't. So it's almost becomes a game. I don't want to say a game, but it's a lot more, it certainly takes, puts the fun back in it.
Totally.
That like pressure away that you're doing something that's good. I'm doing air quotes, good or acceptable. It's like everything's acceptable with food. It's just food. It's just like, we need to kind of quit making such a big production about making a change. Like just try something different, try something different.
Yeah. I don't have kids, but it's also a great way to get kids involved is like, give them choice and be like, okay, cool. Like we're going to, like, let's choose something new that we might try to put on our plates this week. And like, I mean,
I have
that's
2
the best
kids.
way.
You know what I have done a couple times over the last few months we're looking for any sort of entertainment in this pandemic, like, especially the part where we were like locked in. Okay. The show Chopped where they give you like the mystery.
Yes.
So I did that for my kids. My kids are 10 and 13. So they've got a few kitchen skills and they can, they're not like babies. And so I picked out the ingredients and put it in a bag and stapled it shut and said, here, make something. And you know what? They thought it was like fun and hilarious. And, it's like, okay, something it makes it something that they see how they can incorporate and just it's a level of comfort being around food, just sort of not taking the stress out of that interaction, and then modeling that, of course, for our children and other people is just so important because everybody's so stressed about food. They're just wound up so tight. It's like a spring that is going to just like bust. And I think people are ready to like not feel like that.
Totally.
Around eating. So, well, I am so glad that you came and joined me for this conversation today. This is really great. Where can my listeners find you? Tell them about your podcast and the other things that you're doing right now.
Yeah. So you can find me on the Listen to Your Body podcast, everywhere podcasts are found. And then you can find me primarily on social media. I'm on Instagram. So at Steph_Gaudreau. And then my website kind of is the hub for all the things going on, like the different programs that I have. I have a mindful eating tool. So if you thought that the mindful eating sounded really interesting to you, I help you stack habits in that way and put it all together and make it really personal for you and just get going. And then I've got a bunch of other ways that you can work with me. So you can find that all on my site, which is stephgaudreau.com.
Fabulous. And I'll put all that in the notes for people that are listening. If you're driving, don't wreck your car trying to write down her name. It'll all be there so you can click right to it and find Steph. Thank you again for coming and joining me today. It's been wonderful.
Thanks for having me.
Isn't she just so cool? I knew you would love that conversation. So go ahead and look at my show notes for today. You'll be able to find, like I mentioned, all of the information about where to find Steph on her website, her TuneIn membership, her Listen to Your Body podcast, all of the things. She's the real deal. She's not just talking about it. She actually is using all of her very vast scope of knowledge from the nutrition, fitness, wellness space, intuitive eating certification, all the things. She's meeting people where they are and really helping them go through those first steps that are sometimes the very most difficult, getting started. So check her out, listen to her podcast, leave ratings and reviews for both this podcast and Steph's podcast. It is not just a vanity plea. This really helps move our mission forward and amplify the message that she and I are working so hard to get out there. The one last thing I want to leave you with today is if you will check the show notes also, there is a link for a virtual non-diet health summit that is coming up April 5th through 16th. It is called Embrace Your Radiance, and it is being hosted by Kim Hagel, who is a friend of mine and a registered holistic nutritionist and anti-diet fitness professional. But she has got 10 speakers lined up that are going to be awesome and dropping all the truth bombs about how to leave diet culture, why we should, what harm it's doing to us, all those sorts of things. I am one of the speakers, but really, you've heard me enough to be honest. The other 9 people are worth the price of admission. And the link in the show notes shows you how to get your pass. There are free passes available, so you don't have to pay anything to attend if you're going to listen in real time. If there are some upgrade options, if you want to have the replays and have private Q&A sessions with the speakers, well worth it to get that amount of knowledge in one compact pretty little package. So Embrace Your Radiance. Check the show notes for the link, and I will see you there. I appreciate you again, as always, week after week being here to learn more about the anti-diet approach to eating and all the things related to healing our relationship with food so we can be our best selves and eat, love food, get on with it, and get out of our way. So until next time. Thank you so much for being here today. If you love what you've learned, follow me on social media at Maggie Landes MD, and you'll never miss a thing. You can also check out my website at maggielandesmd.com and sign up to be part of our community of eaters. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll talk again soon.